The moment that would forever haunt their investors came wrapped in fancy hors d'oeuvres and insincere smiles. Have you ever watched a room go from roaring applause to complete silence in under 10 seconds? Because I did. Standing there, under the soft glow of the chandeliers at the Grand Hyatt Ballroom, I held a shimmering award engraved with my name, a recognition for being the $640 million architect. Champagne was still bubbling in my glass. The CEO, with his slicked-back hair, blindingly white teeth, and a soul seemingly sold for quarterly gains, walked up, clapping too hard, too loud.
"Ladies and gentlemen,"
he declared, seizing the microphone as if it were a trophy.
"We're entering a bold new era."
I offered a polite smile. I had prepared a thank you speech, something humble, acknowledging the tireless hours and the dedicated team. I never got to deliver it. In light of our strategic evolution, the CEO continued, we're restructuring leadership, and while we honor Ruby's incredible contributions, her role has officially been sunset, effective immediately. A stunned silence descended upon the room.
Not the kind you respect, but the shocked, rubbernecking kind. Did he just fire her on stage? A few gasps broke the quiet. One person actually dropped their fork. I blinked once, my lips still curved upward, the ghost of my unsaid thank you lingering like a fog over my face. "Thank you for your service," the CEO added, already turning to the next slide on the massive screen behind them, a meaningless chart titled Future Vision. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even look surprised. I raised my glass as if offering a toast, nodded, and gracefully stepped off the stage, maintaining that same composed demeanor reserved for open casket funerals and annual performance reviews. You don't forget a moment like that, especially when it's live-streamed to every investor, especially when the woman they just humiliated holds the keys to their entire digital infrastructure. If you're still engrossed and wish to witness how this corporate drama unfolds, hit subscribe. I'm aiming for my first 10,000 followers, and every click makes this narrative feel just a little more satisfying. I didn't drive home that night. I walked 3 blocks in heels I detested, the award clutched like a mere paperweight.
My car remained in the parking lot, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying the last 6 months like corrupted video footage. It hadn't come out of nowhere. The sudden exclusion from meetings, the vague maybe next quarter when I requested resources, the intern mysteriously gaining access to my development environment without my approval. I understood the implications when my code submissions started getting flagged for compliance review. They didn't genuinely value my expertise. They desired my foundational work, my name, and then my eventual departure. I had lingered, driven by a sliver of hope, a misplaced sense of loyalty. No, I wasn't naive. I was calculating. Back at my apartment, I dropped the award onto the kitchen counter. It left a faint crack on the granite, but I didn't flinch. My cat rubbed against my ankle, meowing as if to lodge a complaint. I opened my laptop, checking the license ping logs. 7 heartbeats still active, still pointing to my private repository, the one that sat like a crucial valve in the center of their enterprise pipeline, invisible, untouched, and completely legally mine. They fired me mid-celebration, but they completely overlooked what I had built. The very beating heart of their infrastructure, routed through a framework they never truly owned. I didn't touch a single key that night. I didn't need to. I simply watched the cursor blink, like a pulse, like a promise. The marginalization began subtly, like mold spreading in drywall, quiet, creeping, easy to overlook if you didn't scrutinize closely. Initially, it was just one meeting I wasn't invited to, a seemingly innocent oversight. Then, it became 2. Eventually, my calendar stopped syncing entirely. When I inquired with the new Chief Innovation Officer, a man with the charisma of a TED Talk and the intellect of a browser plugin, why I was absent from roadmap discussions, he responded with a smile that could curdle milk.
We assumed your schedule was quite full with the technical details, he said. Big picture strategies require a different vantage point. Translation: stay in the shadows while we claim your contributions. I observed as my interface notes were handed off to a junior developer who believed redundancy was a spelling error. Budget requests I submitted languished for 6 weeks until someone newer, made the identical request and received approval within the hour. But the ultimate irony was that they still relied on me to finalize everything mission critical, always in a rush, always urgent, always my name listed last in the credits, if at all. I was the system's quiet architect, respected just enough to be indispensable, but never visible enough to be irreplaceable. So, I adapted. I began coding like a woman preparing for an impending storm. I encased my core modules in licensing wrappers, subtle, legally binding, and time-stamped. I utilized open-source dependencies over which I held copyright control, embedding them beneath layers of integration logic that no one else bothered to comprehend, because I understood it, and that had always been sufficient for them, until it wasn't. Every script that passed through my hands carried echoes of my name somewhere, not in obvious header comments, those could be easily removed, but deep within the core of a service. The handshake protocols, the unique serialization schemas, they pulsed with my digital fingerprint. I meticulously documented everything in my own repository, far from their unwieldy company wikis where edits vanished like new interns before tax season. I even developed an internal SDK, just for consistency, I had explained in meetings, and ensured that the entire enterprise network now routed through it, like arteries connected to a heart. That SDK resided on a license server, my license server. They never questioned who hosted it. I never offered the information. It wasn't a weapon back then. I didn't build it with vengeance in mind. I built it like a woman who had been told too many times that trust is earned by people who couldn't even troubleshoot a toaster. I built it like someone who knew she would be thanked for her service the moment her utility peaked. And quietly, I constructed a back door, not a cartoon villain's control panel with blinking lights and countdown timers, but a simple, elegant mechanism. If the license verification ping failed to validate with my key, the SDK would default to a null response. Not an error, not a shutdown, just silence. The kind of silence that causes systems to wait indefinitely. I tested it once, alone, on a Saturday, while the rest of the company was engaged in mindfulness retreats and leadership escape rooms. I ran the simulation in a contained environment. The ping failed. 10 seconds later, dashboards froze, APIs timed out, data synchronization stalled. No alerts triggered, just a sudden loss of operational flow. I reactivated the key, and everything resumed as if nothing had occurred. It unnerved me, not because it disrupted things, but because it functioned too flawlessly. I filed the tool away, burying the access logs beneath a layer of harmless firewall rules, and wrote myself a warning note, encrypted and secured with a passphrase only my late father would have deciphered. Something about the make and model of the lawnmower he allowed me to disassemble as a child. And then, I returned to work, head down, code tight, smiling just enough in meetings to make them forget how sharp my memory truly was. I never intended to pull the emergency cord, but now that they had effectively ignited the plane mid-flight and ejected me without a parachute, well, that emergency cord seemed incredibly inviting. I stirred my coffee with the same stainless steel spoon I had used every morning for a decade, absent-mindedly, rhythmically, like muscle memory from a life that no longer technically existed. I hadn't slept, not in the sense of emotional breakdown, but more like an engineer awaiting a system diagnostic. My mind remained alert, spinning like a server room after a thunderstorm. I did nothing, not actively. I simply didn't interfere. At precisely 7:13 a.m., my phone vibrated. Ping. Incident. License handshake failed. System retry exceeded threshold. I took a slow sip. At 7:17 a.m., another notification. Alert. Downstream API latency exceeded SLA. By 7:22, they were cascading like dominoes in a free fall. Fail, service blocked, core timeout, null schema, heartbeat unknown. Some engineer, probably the fresh-faced kid with the crypto-inspired beard and agile tattoo on his forearm, would be panicking right about now, running a ping trace like a rat in a maze. Call it a minor glitch, perhaps a small regression event. They always did at first. My inbox remained untouched. My Slack account had been deactivated before dessert was served last night, but the logs didn't care who had access. The logs simply reported the truth, and at that moment, the truth was, nothing was functioning. Across the river, inside the gleaming glass and steel headquarters of the company, the first-tier support team was receiving calls from internal managers, external partners, then clients. One of them, likely the European logistics firm they had just onboarded under the $640 million contract, was reporting total synchronization failure with their warehouse API. Orders weren't processing, inventory counts were off, shipments were stalled. Still, the executive suite wasn't panicking. Not yet. Outages happened. Systems hiccuped. Load balancers misfired. It's technology. You reboot, you blame some outdated scheduled task, you implement a patch, and call it Tuesday. But this was no hiccup. By 8:15, the real crisis began. Back-end processes that hadn't received updated tokens started failing entirely. Password resets failed. Middleware buckled. The status page, maintained by a third-party vendor, still claimed all systems operational because it couldn't retrieve the latest logs. At 8:47, my phone vibrated again. This time, it wasn't an alert, just a text. A number I hadn't saved, but one I recognized nonetheless. "Did you do this?" I stared at it. No punctuation, no signature. Just 6 words and a question mark that wasn't there. That omission spoke volumes. Fear, awe, respect, perhaps all three. I set the phone down without replying. There's a unique brand of chaos that only exists when no one knows who's in control, or if anyone still is. By 9:22, panic had reached the executive floor. The CTO, a man who once boasted about refactoring entire systems over a weekend, was now shouting into a headset while desperately trying to trace module dependencies on a touchscreen whiteboard he barely understood. Someone likely asked, "What's failing?" Someone else responded, "Everything." I flipped through a paperback, some cheap legal thriller I had bought at an airport 3 years ago and never opened. The irony was not lost on me. Meanwhile, in conference room 5B, the DevOps lead had just uttered the words that would become legendary in the company's post-mortem report. Why are half the core services still pointing to an external license node? Who even approved this architecture? The silence that followed was so profound, it could have shattered windows. They were beginning to see my footprints now. Too late. This wasn't destruction, not yet. It was erosion. The kind that begins imperceptibly beneath your feet, and by the time you realize what's shifting, the collapse is already in motion. The code base had always been considered stable, a term executives loved to use when they meant untouched since the last person left. Now, under the frantic spotlights of a full-blown outage, that stability looked more like decay covered in duct tape and overly positive presentation slides. It began with a junior engineer, some poor soul working on 2 hours of sleep and a half-eaten breakfast burrito, digging through old commit logs to trace the SDK errors. He wasn't even looking for me, but there I was, tagged in comments from 18 months ago, then 12, then 6. Commit after commit, referencing utilities I had authored, modules I had optimized, patches I had written because no one else could decipher the tangled mess left behind by their now chief innovation officer. And then came the name, not in the comment headers or function calls. I was too clever for that. But embedded inside serialized objects, it left identifiers, hashes, nested keys, field tags, labeled with little inside jokes only my original team would catch, like Cleopatra or Nadiro Kebro V2. One field simply read D-Ghost Flag, triggering a round of nervous laughter that quickly turned to a cold silence as realization dawned. I hadn't merely left fingerprints. I had left a ghost, a spectral thread woven so deeply into the framework that even the CTO couldn't discern where the company ended and Ruby began. By 10:30 a.m., the engineers stopped pretending it was a simple routing issue. The true revelation came when they finally traced the license verification point to an IP block that resolved to an external server registered under a Delaware LLC. Nobody recognized it. The WHOIS data was redacted. The domain was clean, professional, no obvious trail. The CTO, sweating through a performance fabric shirt he wore like armor, asked the one question no one wanted to answer. Who owns the license server? A pause. A longer pause. We assumed it was internal. Assumed, like children assuming the stove is cold because it looks off. They tried pinging the server. Dead. They attempted to bypass the verification call. Failed. They tried spoofing the validation token. Crashed a test environment. They attempted to reroute the SDK logic. Locked up 3 more services. I hadn't built a wall they could climb. I had built gravity, and now it was gone. The CTO placed calls to legal, then compliance, then the CFO. Words like exposure and intellectual property ricocheted around the boardroom like loose nails in a blender. Someone retrieved my employee file. Another person began scanning my exit paperwork. No one could locate a clause indicating I had transferred ownership of my licensing framework, because I hadn't. They had used my work as if it were company property, but I had meticulously filed it, protected it, siloed it under my own operating terms. The documents had been accessible all along in my private storage repository, linked in emails they had archived and never bothered to read, signed under that cloak of plausible deniability that allowed executives to sleep soundly while their infrastructure leaned on scaffolding no one else could sustain. From my apartment, I watched the chaos unfold like a dense fog bank. Stock tickers wobbled. Tweets from minor tech influencers speculated about a multi-client synchronization outage. Even a Reddit thread appeared with the caption, "Is Enterprise Co. going under?" Their backbone just evaporated. And through it all, I remained silent. I didn't respond to the text. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post cryptic memes or quotes about karma or power moves. No subtle jabs. No anonymous leaks. I wasn't some Bond villain with a lair and a dramatic monologue. I was silence, and silence was terrifying. Somewhere amidst the disarray, a project lead finally whispered the thing everyone else was too afraid to voice aloud. What if she didn't break anything? They stared. What if she just took her stuff back? That landed like a gunshot. Because if that were true, then it wasn't sabotage. It was sovereignty. And they possessed nothing. The first official statement hit the wire at 11:42 a.m. A lifeless press release drafted by some weary communications director who hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, and hadn't yet realized he was already updating his resume in his head. Enterprise Co. is experiencing a temporary disruption due to legacy technical debt in its middleware infrastructure. We are actively investigating and expect a full resolution shortly. Our clients remain our top priority. Legacy technical debt, as if my code was some forgotten relic from the floppy disk era. As if the foundation they begged me to build while simultaneously eroding my influence was suddenly ancient history, having nothing to do with me. A neat little lie for shareholders and media to consume, while the company's internal organs liquefied in real time. Lies have a shelf life, and before the PR team could churn out another round of everything is fine presentations, the cracks began to spread inward. Internal Slack logs leaked, revealing screenshots of panicked threads, managers shouting at engineers shouting back. One screenshot, dated 2 months prior, showed a thread where I had raised a concern about improper key storage. The response, a shrug emoji and a reply from the CTO. Not a priority. Move fast. The subreddit exploded. Meanwhile, anonymous emails began trickling into reporters' inboxes, not from me. I was still off the grid, but from people who remembered, former teammates, mid-level engineers. One thread was titled, "They used her, then they buried her." Attached were screenshots of request rejections, Slack messages labeling me a bottleneck, calendar audits showing meeting after meeting from which I was explicitly removed while still being named the primary on every core systems deliverable. Someone had even uncovered a PDF, an archived request I had filed asking for legal clarification on the licensing status of my framework, dated 14 months ago. Denied. No reason given. A quiet fury began to simmer outside the building. By 10:06 p.m., 2 minor investors had issued public statements seeking clarity. By 1:30, a mid-sized VC firm that had poured $80 million into the last funding round filed an emergency request for a shareholder call. And by 2:00 p.m., the news anchor on a financial cable channel posed the question that would become the guillotine's lever. How do you fire the architect of a $640 million deal and then lose access to the infrastructure she built? It wasn't just a tech failure anymore. It was theater, and I was the ghostly protagonist in every whispered script. Inside Enterprise Co., the factions turned on each other. Marketing blamed product blamed engineering blamed legal blamed procurement for not enforcing proper intellectual property transfer protocols. And somewhere in a soundproof boardroom, the CEO, whose brilliant idea it had been to publicly dismiss me for optics, was now searching for phrases like whistleblower retaliation and breach of fiduciary duty. HR pretended not to exist. Compliance ran for cover. The only person with answers was gone and not speaking. Clients started asking questions too, not just about when things would be restored, but about the depth of the instability. I had built more than modules. I had built trust architecture with integrity, and now all that remained was a black box blinking red and an executive team choking on their own hubris. One VP attempted to rally the troops with a rousing all-hands email titled "The Power of Resilience." The email bounced for 113 employees. The user directory was still broken. I didn't leak anything, but I didn't prevent anyone else from revealing the truth either. And truth, once whispered, doesn't easily return to its confines. By sundown, the narrative war had shifted. I wasn't the villain. I was the exiled prophet, and the temple was already in flames. The emergency board meeting was intended to be private, but when panic becomes policy, nothing remains concealed for long. They convened in the 9th floor executive suite, blinds drawn, the air thick with the scent of decaf and desperation. Most of them had flown in that morning. One board member still wore travel socks. The room buzzed with clipped sentences and expensive watches being checked too frequently. No one made eye contact with the CEO, not since that CNBC clip from an hour earlier where his attempt to reassure markets resembled a hostage video filmed amidst a nervous breakdown. "Start from the beginning," barked the chairwoman, her tone sharp enough to strip paint. The CTO cleared his throat and launched into a sanitized version of hell, explaining the SDK dependencies, the failed license handshake, the now inert infrastructure strangling their operations like a python in slow motion. "Why can't we just flip it back on?" someone asked. "Because," the CTO muttered, "we don't own it." A pause. The kind of pause that swallows years of fake confidence and late-night pitch decks. "What do you mean we don't own it?" He slid a printed document across the table. This clause in her original employment contract, amended after the 2017 reorganization, defines anything she developed outside working hours, using her own resources, and not explicitly commissioned in writing, as her property, unless otherwise agreed in writing, which, to be clear, it wasn't. The chairwoman read it twice. One board member audibly swore. Another closed his laptop as if it had personally offended him. "So she built it, We used it, we fired her. Now we can't access it? Correct. And she didn't sabotage anything. Technically, no. She just revoked passive access by not renewing the license ping. The silence was louder than screaming. Legal was already 3 floors down, assembling a crisis response war room. Every outside counsel on retainer had been activated like a DEFCON alert. Attorneys and compliance officers reviewed every communication with me over the past 2 years, desperately trying to ascertain if anyone had violated whistleblower protections, IP clauses, or federal labor retaliation codes. One junior compliance analyst found an internal Slack thread where a VP joked about getting Ruby out before she pulls an Edward Snowden. That single line alone could cost them millions in court. Whispers began to circulate, not just about legal exposure, but about ethics violations. If I had filed a concern and it was suppressed, if I had raised red flags and was punished for it, this wasn't merely a systems crash anymore. It was corporate misconduct. At 4:02 p.m., I sat on my sofa, sipping ginger tea and watching muted coverage of my former company's stock sliding across a red ticker. I didn't smile. I didn't scowl. I looked like someone waiting for a train she had personally scheduled. I picked up my phone, scrolled, and found the number. It belonged to Marissa Devlin, a contracts attorney I used to consult with back when we were both navigating a tech company acquisition in 2015. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but the woman was smart, sharp, and most importantly, discreet. I typed just 5 words. I'm ready to talk, on my terms. 3 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Let's meet. You name the place. Across town, the CEO sat in front of a dry erase board filled with half-erased timelines and red scribbles. One word had been circled 3 times: exposure. He didn't know what I would do next, but the board was no longer asking if he would survive this. They were asking how much longer they had to pretend he was still in charge. The headline dropped at 6:47 a.m. Eastern Time, a timestamp that now lives in infamy on every whiteboard inside Enterprise Company's ruined PR bunker. Exclusive: whistleblower architect retained legal control over Enterprise Company's core infrastructure. Fired without transfer of rights. Collapse tied to revoked access, not internal failure. It came from one of the top tech investigative journalists, someone with Pulitzer rumors swirling around their name like vultures on thermals. The article was crisp, surgical, and devastating. It included annotated screenshots of my licensing agreements, excerpts from board meeting minutes where my contract was misrepresented, and quotes from 2 former compliance officers now requesting whistleblower protection. And near the bottom, a phrase that would be picked up by anchors, podcasters, bloggers, and teenagers with TikTok microphones. This wasn't sabotage. This was theft disguised as restructuring. By 8:03 a.m., hashtag #RubyKnows and IP Matters were trending on X and LinkedIn simultaneously, an unholy convergence of memes and legal commentary. An old photo of me smiling modestly at a 2019 trade show was now being transformed into digital oil paintings, reaction GIFs, even a mock saint candle sold by an Etsy seller under the tagline "Patron Saint of Boundary Clauses." People didn't just sympathize with me, they understood me. I hadn't burned the house down. I had simply turned off the lights and left them to trip over the furniture they never learned to arrange without me. Inside the company, the panic mutated into full-body paralysis. The board issued a formal statement calling the situation deeply regrettable. The CEO, just days earlier, had mocked my contributions in a leaked Slack message. Anyone can code, she just gatekeeps syntax. Went dark. His personal assistant confirmed he had left the building. No one saw him again that day. Investor calls jammed the lines. A third of the shareholder base demanded an emergency vote to restructure the executive suite. 2 firms dumped their entire position in one swift move. The stock opened 12% down and tumbled like a greased bowling ball. By close of market, Enterprise Co. had shed 38% of its value, not from a cyber attack, not from fraud, but simply from reality catching up. Clients weren't far behind. Major ones, enterprise logistics platforms, financial reconciliation engines, even a hospital chain, began reaching out to competitors. Internally, someone leaked a spreadsheet showing active clients by risk rating. 4 of the top 10 had already initiated exit procedures. One client success manager wrote a desperate mass email titled, "How can we rebuild trust?" which was immediately leaked and ridiculed into oblivion with the reply, "Step 1. Don't fire your infrastructure architect during dessert." Meanwhile, I remained quiet. Still no press conference, no social media posts. My legal counsel, Marissa, issued a single line to the Times. "Miss, Randall has not taken any destructive action. She has simply exercised her contractual rights." The word grace was used a lot. So was genius, even revenant, because I didn't gloat. I didn't attempt to sue them into oblivion. I simply allowed them to implode under the weight of their own ignorance, while keeping my dignity so perfectly intact, it looked like armor. By the end of the day, one major client sent me an encrypted email through back channels, just a single line. "If you're rebuilding, we're listening." The final blow didn't come with fireworks or lawsuits or a mic drop at a press conference. It arrived in the form of a press release, short, clinical, devastating in its elegance. Ruby Randall Technologies has signed a long-term licensing agreement with Axis Bridge Global, ensuring operational continuity for their multi-region B2B logistics framework. Terms undisclosed. Axis Bridge was Enterprise County's biggest client, the $640 million jewel in their crown, the very reason I had been on that banquet stage in the first place. And now, I wasn't just in their infrastructure. I was their infrastructure. Signed under a new Delaware entity with airtight IP clauses, staffed by just 6 people. 5 engineers and Marissa, operating lean, quiet, efficient. They didn't even have a public-facing website, just a single-page portal with a login prompt and a footer that read, "We build what you can't afford to lose." The reaction was nuclear. Within hours, 3 more clients reached out, not with threats, but with offers. NDA bound, loyalty fractured. I didn't chase a single one. I didn't have to. Reputation moved faster than marketing ever could. Mine was now folklore. Meanwhile, Enterprise Co. bled out in full view. The CEO, after 2 more days of public flailing, resigned. The board allowed him to compose a feigned farewell email filled with phrases like "deeply proud," "strategic challenges," and "time to refocus on family." No one replied, not even HR. The internal memo leaked before he even hit send. The interim CEO, formerly the CFO, tried to pivot. New messaging, new collaboration culture, new buzzwords. But no one was buying it. The engineers were demoralized. Legal was preparing for a class action suit from employees who realized their bonuses were tied to phantom valuations, and the remaining clients were leaving in quiet waves. In the same boardroom where they once toasted my success with Prosecco and polished speeches, they now argued over who authorized what, who read which clause, who ignored which warning. No one had answers. No one had a plan. Because the plan had always been Ruby. They just didn't realize it until I was gone. For my part, I never raised my voice, never made a scene. I never tweeted a single snide remark, never granted a revenge interview, never even gave a quote. But my presence was everywhere, a ghost within systems, behind client shifts, in compliance audits now citing non-transferable architecture as a cautionary tale. It became a case study, a business school lecture, both a warning and a blueprint. At night, I would sit on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the city I once powered flicker through the trees. My inbox chimed softly. New contracts, invitations, congratulations from people who once ignored me in elevator rides. I read them all, responded to few, not out of arrogance, but out of clarity. I hadn't destroyed anything. I had simply taken back what was mine. No applause followed, no standing ovation, but somewhere inside those hollowed-out executive floors, my name still echoed, and no one would ever forget it. This story teaches us the vital importance of valuing intellectual property and respecting the contributions of every individual within an organization. It's a reminder that true ownership and recognition are paramount, not just for legal reasons, but for fostering a culture of trust and innovation. For creators and innovators, it's a powerful message to always understand and protect your rights, and to build with integrity. For companies, it underscores that short-sighted decisions and the disregard for employee loyalty can have catastrophic, self-inflicted consequences. Ultimately, this narrative highlights the resilience of the human spirit and the power of knowledge, showing that even after setbacks, one can reclaim their worth and build something even stronger, rooted in fairness and self-respect.